It was a typical cold January morning in Los Angeles, with the sun barely rising over the skyline. The streets were already bustling with the usual rush, cars honking, people hurrying, and the city alive with its usual pace. Keanu Reeves, the celebrated actor, was just another face in the crowd today. Or at least, he tried to be. Keanu had always preferred the quieter parts of the city, away from the paparazzi and the endless glare of cameras. He was out for a walk this morning, trying to clear his mind after wrapping up another round of filming. The warmth of his jacket couldn't quite mask the chill in the air, but he liked it that way. It kept him alert. As he walked down the sidewalk, lost in thought, a voice broke through the hum of traffic and chatter around him. "Excuse me, can you help me?" Keanu slowed his pace and turned his head, not expecting what he saw. A young woman, no more than 25, stood on the edge of the street near a small alleyway. Her clothes were tattered, her hair disheveled, and her face, though beautiful, was worn with the kind of exhaustion that only comes from years of hardship. Her eyes, however, were what caught Keanu's attention. They weren't just tired or pleading. They held a strange, intense gaze, like someone who had lived through far more than anyone her age should have. She was homeless. He could tell immediately. But there was something different about her. Something in the way she looked at him that felt personal. Keanu paused for a moment, unsure how to react. He wasn't the type of person who often stopped for street beggars, not because he didn't care, but because he simply didn't know what to say or do. But this was different. There was something in her presence that seemed to call to him. "Please," she repeated, her voice quiet but filled with urgency. "I need help. Just a few dollars. I don't know where else to go." Keanu hesitated for a moment. His heart ached, as it often did when he saw people living in such conditions, but something made him stop. Maybe it was the look in her eyes, or perhaps it was the strange feeling that this moment was somehow important. He pulled out his wallet, his fingers brushing the crisp bills. He was about to hand her a few dollars, when something strange happened. He caught a glimpse of her hand, a small scar running across her wrist, faint but noticeable. It wasn't the type of scar you'd expect from someone living on the streets. It was too personal. Without thinking, Keanu put his wallet back into his pocket. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. The woman looked up at him, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. She wasn't expecting him to ask that. I'm fine," she said quickly, her eyes darting around nervously. "I just need some help. Just a little bit of help, and I'll be okay." But Keanu didn't believe her. Not entirely. Something about the way she said it made him feel like there was more to this story. Something deeper than just a woman asking for money. He knew how to read people. It was one of the skills he'd honed over the years, on and off the set. And something about her wasn't adding up. Keanu glanced down at the street, wondering if he should just walk away. After all, he had a busy day ahead. But then he felt it, a pull, something that wouldn't let him go. He took a step forward. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She froze, her eyes widening for a brief second before she quickly recovered. "Lily," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu nodded, trying to make sense of the situation. Something wasn't right, but he wasn't going to walk away yet. Not from someone who looked like they needed a little more than just a few dollars. "Lily," he said, his tone steady, "do you mind if I ask you a question?" She looked at him warily, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her coat. What do you want to know?" "Why are you out here?" Keanu asked, his voice soft yet insistent. "This doesn't seem like just bad luck. Something brought you here. Something more than just a rough patch." For a moment, Lily didn't speak. She looked down at the ground, as if trying to find the words. The tension between them was palpable, the kind that you feel when someone is on the verge of revealing something they've hidden for far too long. Finally, she sighed deeply and met his gaze. I didn't plan for this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "No one plans to end up here, right? But sometimes life takes unexpected turns, and sometimes you can't find your way back." Keanu's heart tightened. He had heard stories like this before, but hearing it from her, someone who seemed so lost, so broken, struck him harder than he expected. Before he could respond, she quickly added, "But it's fine. I'm fine. Her eyes darted away from his. Keanu wasn't so sure. But there was one thing he knew for certain now. There was something important about this moment. Something that was about to change. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Let me get you some help," he said, dialing a number he had saved for times like this. "We can figure this out. I don't want to see you out here alone." Lily's eyes widened again, this time with surprise. But something else too, hope. This wasn't just a regular encounter. Keanu could feel it in his gut. This was the beginning of something bigger than either of them could have imagined. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Lily sat on the cold concrete, her knees pulled tightly to her chest. Keanu's sudden shift in attention had thrown her off. She wasn't used to people seeing past the surface, and his words had hit her harder than she expected. No one ever asked her why she was out here. Most people either ignored her or handed over a few dollars and moved on. But not Keanu. He seemed different, and that scared her. She watched him as he talked on the phone, his voice calm but urgent. She could hear the concern in his words, something she hadn't heard in a long time. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a split second, she wondered if she could trust him. Keanu hung up the phone and turned back to her. "I've called someone who can help. They'll be here soon." Lily nodded, though she wasn't sure how to feel. She wanted to thank him, to say something, but the words felt stuck in her throat. What could she possibly say to someone like him? Someone who had everything and still chose to look at her. Really look at her? She let out a soft breath, her eyes avoiding his. Her hands, once wrapped tightly around her knees, now trembled slightly as she let them fall to her sides. She was scared, and for the first time in a long time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, things might change. But change wasn't something she was used to. Keanu sat down next to her, leaving a respectful distance between them. He could see the tension in her posture, the way she held herself so tightly, as if every part of her life had taught her not to trust anyone. "So, Lily," he started, his voice gentle, "I know it's not easy to talk about, but if you don't mind, I'd like to hear your story. I don't want to force you, but I'd like to understand how you got here." She glanced at him briefly, gauging his sincerity. It wasn't the first time someone had offered to listen, but it was the first time someone like him had. She didn't know what to make of it, but for the first time, she felt like it wouldn't hurt to share. Lily sighed and slowly began. "I wasn't always like this. I had a family, a life. Everything was fine until it wasn't." Her voice cracked slightly. She hadn't spoken about her past in a long time. "I had a good job. I was a graphic designer. I was happy. I thought I was. Then, my mom got sick. Really sick. Cancer. And everything changed after that." Keanu nodded, silently urging her to continue. "I didn't know what to do. I quit my job to take care of her. It was supposed to be temporary. Just a few months, I thought. But she died. And then everything started falling apart. I couldn't keep up with the bills. I couldn't cope." Lily paused, her eyes darkening as she swallowed the pain rising in her chest. "I had to sell the house. I couldn't afford to stay in it anymore. After that, I just lost myself. I ended up here." Keanu could see the hurt in her eyes, the rawness of her words. It wasn't just the loss of her mother. It was the loss of everything she had worked for, everything that once gave her purpose. And now, here she was, broken, lost, and abandoned. "You don't have to keep going," Keanu said softly. He didn't want to push her, but at the same time, he wanted to make sure she knew she wasn't alone. Lily shook her head. "No, it's okay. I need to talk about it. I need to say it out loud." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the air before continuing. "After that, I didn't know where to turn. I couldn't find a job. I lost my friends. The few I had left, they didn't understand. They couldn't understand. And so, I ended up out here, alone." Keanu sat in silence, absorbing her words. He could see now that her story wasn't just one of bad luck. There was so much more beneath the surface: pain, abandonment, and the crushing weight of loss. She wasn't just a homeless person asking for help. She was a woman who had fought to keep everything together, only to see it all slip away. But there was something else, too. Something that didn't quite add up. Her story, her pain. It was all real, but there was an intensity in her eyes, an underlying strength that suggested she was far more than the life she had ended up with. Keanu wasn't sure yet what that strength was, but he intended to find out. "Lily, I get that it's hard," he said gently, "but if you're willing to let me, I'd like to help you. I'm not saying I have all the answers, or that I can fix everything, but maybe we can figure this out together." Lily looked at him for a long moment, unsure of what to make of his offer. She had accepted help from others before, but it had always been fleeting, temporary. She wasn't sure she could trust someone like Keanu, someone who had so much. And yet, something about his calm demeanor, his willingness to listen, made her hesitate. "Why would you want to help me?" she asked, her voice thick with skepticism. Keanu smiled gently, not in a patronizing way, but with genuine warmth. "Because I think people deserve a chance, Lily. And because, no matter what, I believe everyone has something important to offer. Maybe you just need someone to help you see that again." She let his words settle in her mind, feeling a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But it was small. Too small to trust just yet. She was scared. Scared of what would happen if she let herself believe things could get better. Keanu stood up, offering his hand to her. "You don't have to decide anything right now, but if you want to make a change, I'm here. No pressure. Just think about it." Lily stared at his hand for a moment, the hesitation clear in her eyes. Then, slowly, she reached out, taking it. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of something real, something that just might lead her out of the darkness. Lily didn't sleep much that night. The streets were quieter than usual, the hum of the city almost drowned out by the sound of her own thoughts. She lay awake in her makeshift bed, tucked behind a row of dumpsters where she had found some temporary refuge. She couldn't help but replay everything Keanu had said to her earlier that day. "Maybe we can figure this out together." She couldn't get those words out of her mind. There was something about them, something about him, that kept tugging at her heart. But was she really ready to trust someone again? Especially someone like him, someone with everything to lose by even acknowledging her existence. She shifted uncomfortably on the hard ground, pulling her worn jacket tighter around her shoulders. The cold seeped through, but the chill she felt wasn't from the night air. It was the uncertainty that gripped her heart. She didn't know how to do this. She had spent years learning to survive on her own, to protect herself from the world's indifference. But Keanu had offered her something she hadn't experienced in a long time: kindness. And kindness, she knew, could be just as dangerous as indifference, because it made her believe in things she didn't know if she was ready to face again. The next morning, Lily met Keanu at a small cafe in downtown LA, the one he had suggested they meet at the day before. It was a quiet place, tucked away from the bustling crowds, a place that felt like an oasis in the middle of the chaos. She hadn't been in a place like this in years, certainly not since before her world had crumbled. The warm smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and she couldn't help but inhale deeply, savoring the scent. For a brief moment, she almost forgot where she was. Keanu was already seated at a corner booth when she arrived. He looked up from his coffee as she walked in, his eyes meeting hers with that same calm intensity. He stood up to greet her, his smile warm and welcoming. "Good morning, Lily," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. She nodded, hesitating for a moment before sitting down. Her hands were still shaking, but she wasn't sure if it was from nerves or the fact that she was still trying to process everything. Keanu had given her space, not pushing her to talk, but there was an air of expectation between them now. She knew she couldn't keep avoiding it forever. Something had to change. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," she began, her voice quieter than usual, "about how you want to help. But I'm not sure I can just accept help like that. People don't just change, Keanu. Life doesn't just get better because someone says it will." Keanu's expression softened, his eyes understanding but firm. "I get it. I'm not here to fix you, Lily. I'm not a superhero. But I believe that change doesn't happen overnight. It starts with a choice, a decision to do something different, to reach out even when it feels impossible." Lily stared at him for a moment, taking in his words. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that there was a way out of the dark hole she had found herself in, but the weight of everything she had been through made it hard to trust that things could actually be different. "I don't even know where to start," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been out here so long. I don't know how to be anything else." Keanu leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "It doesn't matter how long it's been. What matters is what you do next. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. You don't have to do it alone. But I can help you find a way out." Lily swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in her throat. She wanted to believe him, but fear held her back. What if he was just like everyone else? What if he got tired of her brokenness, and left just like the rest? Keanu seemed to sense her hesitation. "I'm not going anywhere, Lily," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "But you have to meet me halfway. I can't help you if you don't want to help yourself." The words stung, but in a way, they also made sense. She had spent so much time running from her past, from the pain, from the fear of failure. She had spent years pushing people away, telling herself she didn't need anyone. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running. It was time to face what had happened, and to face what was still possible. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to look Keanu in the eye. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted quietly, "but I'm willing to try." Keanu smiled, a small but genuine smile. "That's all I'm asking for, Lily. Just one step at a time." For the first time in a long while, Lily felt something stir inside her. Hope, tentative and fragile, but it was there. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough to start moving forward. But as they sat there, talking about what came next, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. Something she couldn't quite understand yet. There was more to her past, more to her story, and more to the choices she would have to make in the coming days. And as Keanu spoke to her, patiently, with the same unwavering belief in her that he had the day before, Lily realized that it wasn't just about the help he offered. It was about the hope he had reignited in her heart. But even as the conversation moved forward, Lily's mind wandered to a darker place. What if this wasn't just about her? What if there was something more to her being out here, something she had yet to uncover? She couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, a turning point she hadn't yet seen. And when it came, it would change everything. The next few days passed in a blur of awkward conversations and tentative steps forward. Keanu had introduced Lily to a few people, support networks, local shelters, a community of volunteers who offered food, clothes, and resources to those in need. But even with the help, Lily couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider, like someone who didn't belong anywhere. No matter how kind they were to her, she felt like she was still trapped in the shadows of her past. Keanu didn't give up on her, though. He checked in every day, made sure she had what she needed, and even invited her out for lunch a few times. He never pushed, never asked too many questions. But Lily could tell he was watching her, waiting for her to take the next step. The idea of starting over, of truly starting fresh, was terrifying. She wasn't sure she was ready for it, but the thought of staying in the same place, stuck in the same cycle, was even worse. The more she tried to open up to Keanu, the more she realized how much she had closed herself off. For years, she had been a fortress, afraid of letting anyone in because it was easier to protect herself than to face the vulnerability that came with trusting someone. Keanu was different. She couldn't explain it, but there was something about him, something in his quiet kindness, that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could let her guard down. But there were still so many questions she couldn't answer, so many pieces of her past that didn't fit. Lily had never told anyone the full story of what had happened to her, not even Keanu. The scar on her wrist was a constant reminder of what she had been through, but it was a part of her history that she couldn't bring herself to talk about. Not yet, anyway. Maybe someday. That night, as she sat on a bench near the cafe where Keanu had met her, she felt the familiar pang of loneliness in her chest. The streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and the city felt so vast, so overwhelming. Lily had come a long way in the past few days, but there were still so many unanswered questions. The life she had once known seemed like a distant memory, one she wasn't sure she even wanted to revisit. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. She pulled it out, surprised to see a text from Keanu. "Hey Lily, I know things are overwhelming, but I want you to know I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. If you need to talk, I'm just a call away. Don't be afraid to reach out." She stared at the message for a long moment, feeling both comforted and unsettled. Keanu's words were always kind, but there was something deeper beneath them, something she hadn't been able to ignore. It was like he knew there was more to her story than she had shared, and it terrified her. But what terrified her even more was the possibility of losing him. She texted him back a simple reply, "Thanks, Keanu. I'll be okay." But even as she typed the words, she knew they weren't true. She wasn't okay. Not by a long shot. Just as she was about to put her phone back in her pocket, a man's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Hey, you." Lily's heart skipped a beat. She looked up to see a figure emerging from the shadows. A tall man with a rough appearance, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. Her instincts kicked in, and she instinctively pulled her jacket tighter around her, trying to appear calm. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with caution. The man stepped closer, his gaze cold and calculating. "You don't know me, but I know you." He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that sent a chill down her spine. "I've been watching you." Lily's heart pounded in her chest as she stood up, ready to make a run for it. But something in his eyes made her hesitate. He wasn't here to hurt her, at least not physically. There was something else, something deeper in his gaze, something that made her stomach twist in knots. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, though her nerves were beginning to get the best of her. The man's smile faltered for a moment, then he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I know what happened to you, Lily. I know about your little secret, and I think it's time you told someone." Her blood ran cold. Her secret, the one she had kept buried for so long. How did he know? She backed away slowly, her eyes scanning for a way out, but the man didn't follow. He just stood there, watching her, his words lingering in the air like a dark cloud. "I'll be seeing you soon," he said cryptically before turning and disappearing into the night. Lily stood frozen for a long moment, her mind racing. How could he know? Who was he? And why was he threatening her now, of all times? Her hands were shaking as she fumbled for her phone and dialed Keanu's number. He picked up on the first ring. "Lily? What's wrong?" I just met someone. He knows about my past, Keanu. He knows my secret." Keanu's voice became immediately serious. "Lily, where are you? Stay where you are, okay? Don't move." I'm just down the street from the cafe," she whispered, her heart still pounding in her chest. "Stay there. I'm coming to get you." The line went silent, and Lily could feel the tears welling up in her eyes. What had she gotten herself into? The past she had tried so hard to bury was catching up to her, and there was nowhere to hide. Lily didn't move. Her body remained frozen on the bench, as if staying completely still would somehow keep the world from closing in on her. She could feel the weight of the man's words pressing on her chest, suffocating her with the realization that her past had somehow followed her here, into the present. The thought that someone new, someone other than herself, was terrifying. It wasn't just the shame, the fear of being exposed. It was that small, persistent voice in her head that whispered, "You can never outrun it. It will always find you." Her fingers trembled as she gripped the phone, waiting for Keanu to show up. She didn't even know what she'd say to him when he arrived. She didn't know what to say to anyone. Her secret was so deeply buried, so tightly locked away, that she couldn't bear the thought of letting it out. Not now, not after all this time. Minutes felt like hours as she sat there, scanning every face that passed, every shadow that crept across the street. The city, which had always felt like an escape, now felt oppressive. The noise, the people, the hustle and bustle. It all felt too close, too suffocating. She could feel the presence of the stranger's threat in the air, thick and heavy, like a storm waiting to break. And then, just as the weight of her fear threatened to crush her, she saw him. Keanu. He was walking toward her with purpose, his eyes scanning the street before landing on her. His face softened when he saw her sitting there, alone. But when he reached her, there was a look of concern in his eyes. "You all right?" Keanu asked, his voice low but full of worry. He didn't sit down immediately. Instead, he stood in front of her, blocking her view of the street, as if to protect her from whatever might be out there. Lily didn't know how to respond. She wanted to break down and tell him everything, but she couldn't. "Not yet. I saw someone," she said, her voice hoarse. He knows about me. He said he knows my secret." Keanu's face hardened. "What secret, Lily? What did he say to you?" She shook her head, tears starting to form in her eyes. I can't tell you yet. It's too much. I don't even know how he knows." Keanu crouched down in front of her, his eyes soft but insistent. "I'm not going to push you, but I need you to trust me. This is serious. Whoever he is, he's not just someone you can ignore. If he knows about your past, it's not just a coincidence." Lily wrapped her arms around herself, trying to gather her thoughts. She could feel the warmth of Keanu's presence, his calm assurance, but it wasn't enough to drown out the storm raging in her mind. She didn't want to tell him. She didn't want to expose herself like this, not after everything she'd been through. But she couldn't keep running from the past forever. If Keanu was offering her a way out, if he was offering his help, then maybe, just maybe, she could find the courage to face what she buried for so long. "I'm scared, Keanu," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't want to go back to that place. I don't want to be that person again." Keanu reached out and gently took her hand. "You don't have to do this alone, but if you're ready, I'll be with you every step of the way. We'll figure it out together." Lily looked up at him, her eyes filled with doubt. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel safe. But the fear that had gripped her for so long was hard to shake. It was ingrained in her bones. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said, her voice small. "I don't know if I can." Keanu didn't say anything for a moment, just watching her with a steady gaze, as though waiting for her to find the strength she needed within herself. He didn't push her. He just let the silence stretch between them, giving her the space to decide. And in that silence, something inside Lily shifted. She couldn't keep running. She couldn't keep hiding behind the wall she had built. The weight of her secret had been too much for too long, and she realized now that facing it, no matter how painful, was the only way forward. "I'll tell you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "but only if you promise me something." Keanu's expression softened, his concern still evident. "Anything? Promise me you won't leave," Lily said, her voice breaking. "Promise me you won't walk away when you hear what I have to say." Keanu nodded, his grip on her hand firm but gentle. "I promise. I won't leave you, Lily." Lily took a shaky breath and began. The words felt like they were choking her, but she couldn't stop them now. Not when she had finally taken that first step. "It was years ago," she started, her voice faltering as she tried to gather her thoughts. "Before everything fell apart. I had a life. I had dreams. But then," she paused, trying to steady herself, "my father. He wasn't the man I thought he was. He wasn't the man I wanted him to be. He hurt me, Keanu. He hurt me in ways I can't even begin to explain." Keanu's face tightened with anger at the mention of her father, but he didn't interrupt. He just listened, his presence a steady anchor as she continued. "I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't let anyone know. I was too ashamed, too terrified of what people would think of me. So I ran. I ran from everything. I pushed it all down until I couldn't anymore. Until I was on the streets. Alone." Keanu squeezed her hand, but didn't speak. His silence told her he understood more than she could put into words. "But someone knows. Someone from my past. And I think they're here to make me pay for what I did, what I didn't do." Lily felt the tears that had been threatening to fall finally spill over, running down her face. She didn't know what to expect now, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't go back. Not now. Not after finally telling someone. Keanu wiped her tears gently, his voice soft but unwavering. "We'll figure this out. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." Lily nodded, her chest feeling a little lighter, though the weight of her past still hung heavily in the air. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for the first time in years, she felt like she might have a chance. The days that followed felt like an emotional roller coaster for Lily. Once she'd opened up to Keanu, the floodgates had been loosened. It felt like she couldn't stop talking, even when she wasn't sure she was ready to hear her own words. Every night, as she lay awake in her makeshift bed, she replayed the conversation over and over in her mind, analyzing every detail, every hesitation in her voice. But it wasn't just the confession that haunted her. It was the knowledge that the man who had confronted her in the street was still out there, waiting. She couldn't shake the thought that he knew more than just the details of her past. There was a level of certainty in his eyes that made her stomach churn. And if he knew, then what was to stop him from telling everyone else? The world she was starting to rebuild could crumble in an instant. Keanu stayed true to his word. He didn't push her for more than she was willing to share, but he was always there when she needed him. Every time she called or texted, he responded. Every time she felt the panic rising in her chest, he reassured her. Even when she felt like running, Keanu was there, urging her to stay. She had agreed to meet with him again that afternoon, after he told her he'd found someone who could help her. It was a new face, someone from his past who had experience working with people who had faced trauma similar to hers. Keanu hadn't explained much, but Lily was curious. She needed answers. She needed to know what was next. When she arrived at the cafe, she noticed a woman sitting at a table by the window. She was in her late 30s, wearing a light blue blouse and a cardigan, her hair neatly pulled back into a ponytail. She didn't look like someone who had dealt with the darkness Lily had. She looked calm, professional, almost detached. But there was something about her eyes, something that hinted at empathy, as if she understood more than she let on. Keanu spotted her first, and when he saw Lily, he waved her over. "Lily, this is Sarah," Keanu said as she sat down. "She's the person I mentioned. She works with people who've been through tough situations, people who are trying to rebuild their lives." Sarah extended her hand with a warm smile. "It's good to meet you, Lily. I've heard a lot about you." Lily shook her hand, still unsure of what to expect. She wasn't used to people reaching out to help. In fact, she was more used to keeping people at arm's length. Keanu sat down next to her, his body turned slightly toward Sarah, as if to show that he trusted her completely. That was another thing about Keanu. He was always so open, so sure. It was hard to not want to believe him. Sarah spoke gently, her voice calm and steady. "I know this may feel overwhelming, but I want you to know that you're not alone. I'm here to listen. I'm not here to push you into anything you're not ready for. But I think, with time, we can help you get to a place where you don't feel so trapped by your past." Lily swallowed, her throat tight. "I don't even know where to begin." Sarah nodded, her expression empathetic but unwavering. "It's okay. We don't need to start at the beginning. We can take it slow. But I do want to start with one thing. What brought you here? What's kept you from reaching out for help until now?" Lily's fingers twisted nervously in her lap. She knew what Sarah was asking, but the words didn't come easily. She had spent so much of her life trying to bury the truth, trying to pretend that it didn't matter. But now, sitting here with these two people who had, in some strange way, become her lifeline, she knew it was time to confront it. "I guess," she hesitated, her eyes flicking nervously from Keanu to Sarah. "I've always felt like I didn't deserve help, like I brought this all on myself. I ran away from everything. I didn't trust anyone, and now, I'm just stuck with what I've done." Keanu's hand found hers under the table, squeezing it lightly. "It's not about what you've done, Lily. It's about what you do now. You're here. You're trying. That's what matters." Sarah gave him a small, approving smile before turning her focus back to Lily. "Keanu's right. You can't change the past, but you can change what happens next. The fact that you're here, talking about it, that's huge. And that's where we start." Lily nodded, her eyes clouding with doubt. "But what if I'm not strong enough? What if I can't do it? What if I fail again?" "Failure is part of the process," Sarah said, her voice firm but comforting. "Everyone struggles. The important thing is to learn from those struggles, not let them define you. And if you fall, you get back up. You keep moving forward." The words felt like a lifeline, but they also felt foreign. Keep moving forward. She had spent so long just surviving that the idea of thriving, of actually moving forward, seemed almost impossible. Keanu, as if sensing her hesitation, added, "And I'll be here, every step of the way. I won't let you fall, Lily. Not again." The promise hung in the air, warm and heavy. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lily allowed herself to believe it. To believe in something, someone, beyond the walls she had built. But as the conversation moved on, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something she still hadn't fully uncovered about her past. Something important. The man who had threatened her, the man who seemed to know too much. It all pointed to something bigger. Something she hadn't realized until now. There was a secret buried deeper than she had allowed herself to face. And she had a feeling that this secret was the key to everything. Her healing, her freedom, and maybe even her safety. As Keanu and Sarah spoke, Lily's mind raced. She wasn't just running from her past anymore. She was chasing something that could change everything. But to find it, she knew she would have to confront the ghost she had spent years trying to escape. Lily left the cafe feeling conflicted. The conversation with Keanu and Sarah had been helpful, yes, but it had also opened up new questions, new concerns she hadn't been ready to face. Sarah's calm demeanor and wise words were reassuring, but they hadn't fully alleviated the dread that gnawed at Lily's insides. The truth that she had been running from for so long was still there, lurking beneath the surface, and it felt like it was only a matter of time before it exploded. As she walked the familiar streets of the city, her thoughts turned inward. The man who had confronted her, he knows? His words echoed in her mind. "I know your secret." But how? How could he have known something so deeply hidden, so carefully locked away? Was it just a random encounter? Or was there something more to this? Was he connected to her past in ways she couldn't even imagine? The questions were suffocating, pulling her deeper into herself, making it harder to breathe. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing you couldn't turn back but unsure whether to leap or retreat. Her whole body felt heavy, weighed down by the uncertainty and fear. Keanu had promised her he wouldn't let her fall. But could he really protect her from the storm that seemed to be closing in around her? The thought that someone from her past had tracked her down made her feel more vulnerable than ever. It was as if every step forward she took was met with a shadow from her past, lurking just beyond the corner. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her spiraling thoughts. It was a message from Keanu. "Hey, I know you're processing a lot right now. I just want to remind you that I'm here for you. Whenever you're ready to talk more, or if you need space, I understand. Just don't shut me out. You're not alone." Lily read the message several times, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. He truly meant it. He wasn't going to back down. He was giving her the space she needed, but he was also making sure she knew he wasn't going anywhere. It was comforting, but it also reminded her of how much she had yet to confront. A part of her wanted to reach out, to tell him everything, to finally be free. But another part of her was terrified of what would happen once the truth was out in the open. Would Keanu still be there? Would he see her differently? Could anyone, even him, truly understand what she had been through? She sat on a nearby bench, letting the city pass by in a blur of movement. People walked in and out of her field of vision, but for once, she felt detached from it all. It was like being a ghost, floating above her own life, watching as things happened around her but not feeling like she could fully participate. The sound of footsteps approaching broke her reverie. Lily glanced up and froze when she saw the man from before, the one who had confronted her on the street. He was walking toward her, his eyes fixed on her with the same unnerving intensity as before. She stood quickly, her heart racing. Her body screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to stay put, to face whatever it was he wanted. Her mind scrambled for an escape, but the city was still buzzing with people, and she was too exposed to hide. He was too close now. There was nowhere to go. He stopped just a few feet away, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. His presence felt oppressive, as though the air itself had thickened. Lily's throat was tight, her hands trembling at her sides. The man's gaze never wavered. Finally, he spoke, his voice smooth, almost casual. "You've been avoiding me." Lily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I don't know what you want from me," she said, her voice colder than she felt. I don't know how you know about me, but I'm not interested in whatever you're selling. He chuckled, a low, unsettling sound that made her skin crawl. I'm not selling anything, sweetheart, but you're not as invisible as you think. You've got a past, and it's a past that's got people interested. Important people. Lily's heart pounded in her chest. Her eyes flicked to her phone in her hand, wondering if she should text Keanu. But before she could move, the man took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I'm not here to hurt you, Lily, but if you want to stay safe, you need to be careful. There are people out there who would do anything to get what they want. And you, well, you're the key to something they need. So, I'm offering you a chance. You either play along, or things get a lot messy, eh? Lily felt a cold chill wash over her. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was bigger, much bigger. The fear she had felt earlier now had a face, and it was standing right in front of her. What do you want from me? Lily asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. He gave her a smile that didn't reach his eyes. What I want is simple. I want you to trust me. I want you to give me something in return for your safety. Her mind raced. What could he possibly want from her? What was it that had made her so valuable in their eyes? Before she could say another word, the man turned and walked away, his last words lingering in the air like a warning. I'll be in touch. Don't make this difficult, Lily. Lily stood there, stunned, watching him disappear into the crowd. Her breath came in shallow bursts, and her knees felt weak beneath her. What had just happened? What did he mean by important people? And what did he want from her? Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from Keanu. Lily, are you okay? I'm worried about you. Call me when you can. She stared at the message for a long moment, the words feeling distant, surreal. The storm was closing in, and there was no way to outrun it. She didn't hesitate this time. She tapped out a quick reply. Keanu, I need your help. Something's happening. I'm not safe. The response came almost immediately. I'm on my way. Stay where you are. Lily didn't know how much time she had, but she knew one thing. She wasn't running anymore. It was time to face what was coming head-on. Lily sat on the bench, her fingers trembling as she stared at her phone, waiting for Keanu to arrive. Her heart was racing, her mind filled with 1,000 chaotic thoughts. What had just happened? The man's words echoed in her mind, repeating like a broken record. You're the key to something they need. What could he possibly mean? And who were these important people? Her past had never been this complicated, and now it seemed like she was caught in the middle of something far bigger than she could have ever imagined. She glanced around the street, feeling more exposed than ever. She had been running for so long, but now it seemed that her past was catching up with her, and it was threatening to pull her under. The dread that had been building inside her for so long had reached a boiling point. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was running out of time, and whatever this man wanted, it was only the beginning. The sounds of the city, once so comforting in their chaotic rhythm, now felt distant. It was as if she was in a vacuum, separated from everything and everyone around her. She couldn't trust anyone, not fully anyway, not even herself. The lies she had told to protect herself were starting to unravel, and she wasn't sure if she could hold them together much longer. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice, low and calm. Lily? She turned her head to see Keanu standing in front of her, his expression filled with concern. His eyes immediately scanned the street, his gaze sharp, looking for any sign of danger. He must have sensed her unease, but he didn't say anything about it. Instead, he crouched down in front of her, gently placing his hands on her shoulders. You okay? Keanu asked, his voice soft but insistent. Lily nodded, even though everything inside her screamed no. She wasn't okay, not by a long shot, but she didn't want to worry him. She didn't want to burden him more than she already had. I don't know what to do anymore, she said, her voice shaky. There's a man. He knows something about me, about my past, and he said there are people after me. Important people. Keanu's face hardened at the mention of the man. What did he want? Lily shook her head, her breath coming faster now. I don't know. He didn't tell me everything, but he said that I'm the key to something they need. I don't understand. I didn't even know who he was. Her voice broke, and she looked down at her hands, as though they held the answers. I thought I could outrun this, but I don't know what to do anymore. Keanu was silent for a moment, his eyes scanning her face as though he were weighing his next words carefully. You're not alone, Lily. Whatever's coming, we'll face it together. You don't have to do this by yourself. Lily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him, but something inside her resisted. Could she really rely on him? Could she really let someone else into the mess of her life? I don't know if I can let anyone in, Keanu, she whispered. I don't even know if I'm ready for this. Keanu's hands gently cupped her face, tilting her chin up so that their eyes met. You don't have to be ready. You just have to take the first step, and I'm with you, no matter what comes next. Lily closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to feel the warmth of his hands, the reassurance in his words. But the uncertainty still clung to her, like a shadow. Her past was never as simple as she wanted it to be. And whatever it was the man had meant about her being the key, it felt like something she wasn't ready to understand. A chill ran down her spine as she remembered something else he had said. Don't make this difficult, Lily. The way he said it had been so final, so cold. It was like a warning. And Lily couldn't help but wonder if the worst was still to come. We need to get you somewhere safe, Keanu said, his tone decisive now. I know someone who can help us figure this out. They're good at handling things like this. You don't have to face it alone. Not anymore. Lily opened her eyes and looked at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. But all she saw was determination. A fierce, unwavering determination that made her believe, just for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Okay, she whispered, nodding. Let's do it. Keanu led her down the street, his presence solid beside her. They didn't talk much as they walked, but Lily could feel the tension in the air between them. They were both acutely aware of what was happening, but neither of them knew exactly what to expect. Every step felt like they were walking into the unknown, heading towards something they couldn't quite see. Finally, they reached a small building tucked away on a quiet street, a place that seemed ordinary, but something about it made Lily uneasy. Keanu knocked on the door, and they waited in silence for a few moments before it swung open. A tall woman in her early 40s greeted them. She had sharp eyes, but her expression was warm, welcoming. Keanu, she said, offering him a small, knowing smile. I figured you'd show up sooner or later. And you must be Lily. Lily nodded, trying to keep her anxiety in check. The woman's gaze was steady, but Lily couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to be as easy as Keanu had made it sound. Come in, the woman said, stepping aside to let them in. We have a lot to discuss. The door clicked shut behind them, and Lily felt a strange sense of finality. There was no turning back now. The truth was out there, waiting for her, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. But as she followed Keanu inside, she realized that she didn't have much of a choice anymore. Whatever was coming next, she would face it with him by her side. And for the first time in a long time, that thought offered her a small sense of comfort. Lily's nerves buzzed like a low hum in her ears as she stepped into the small, dimly lit room. The door clicked shut behind them, and she felt the weight of it, as though they were stepping into a space where there was no going back. The woman who had greeted them, a sharp-eyed, confident stranger, gestured for them to sit. Keanu led her toward a worn leather couch, and Lily took a seat, folding her arms tightly across her chest as if to shield herself from what was coming. Her heart was still racing from the encounter with the man earlier, and every word he had said echoed in her mind, growing louder with each passing second. You're the key to something they need. The room around her seemed to shrink with each thought, but it wasn't just her past closing in on her. It was the uncertainty of the future. What would happen next? What were they going to uncover here? The woman took a seat opposite them, folding her hands on the table in front of her. She looked at Keanu first, then turned her steady gaze on Lily, her expression calm, but piercing. I'm Sarah, she said, her voice warm but direct. Keanu told me a little about what's been happening, but I need to hear it from you, Lily. I need you to tell me everything. Lily swallowed hard. Everything? It felt impossible. She had spent so many years trying to keep her life, her secrets, buried. Telling Sarah everything would mean ripping open old wounds she wasn't sure she could survive. But she knew it had to be done. If she wanted to be safe, if she wanted to understand what was happening, she couldn't keep running. Not anymore. Taking a deep breath, Lily finally spoke, her voice shaky at first. I don't even know where to begin. I guess. I ran away when I was a teenager. My home life, it wasn't safe. It wasn't a place where I could be me. And when things got worse, I left. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't trust anyone. Sarah nodded, her expression understanding but unyielding. And after you left? Lily hesitated. The next part of the story the hardest to tell. After I left, I ended up on the streets. It wasn't easy, but it felt safer than going back. Over the years, I tried to start over, try to get a job, make something of myself, but I kept moving around. I couldn't stay in one place for long. Every time I thought I was close to getting it together, something always happened. Something always pulled me back. Keanu leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers, silently urging her to continue. Then, Lily hesitated. The memory was still raw, the pain of it still fresh. Then I started noticing things. Strange people watching me, people asking questions. I thought I was just being paranoid, but now, I'm not so sure. And then, this man, he found me. Sarah's eyebrows furrowed, and Lily could see the shift in her demeanor. She was listening carefully now, her attention fully on Lily. What did this man want? Sarah asked, her voice taking on a sharper edge. Lily's hands clenched in her lap. He said he knew my secret, that I was the key to something. I don't know what he meant. I don't even know how he found me, but he did. And now I feel like I'm trapped. Sarah exchanged a glance with Keanu before turning back to Lily. Your secret. That's the part one need to understand. What exactly did you do, Lily? What is it that makes you so important? Lily swallowed hard, the weight of Sarah's question pressing on her chest. She had avoided this moment for so long, but now, here it was. She had to face it. I never told anyone this, not even Keanu. But the thing is, my dad. Lily's voice faltered, and she cleared her throat. My dad wasn't just an ordinary guy. He was involved in something dangerous, something illegal. And one day, I found out about it. I found out about a deal he had made, a deal that went horribly wrong. Lily felt her stomach twist at the memory. My dad had enemies. I think one of them was after him, and when I found out about it, he tried to get me to leave, to go somewhere safe. But I didn't listen. I stayed. Her voice shook as she continued, her words spilling out faster now. He tried to cover it up. He tried to protect me, but it didn't work. My mom, she got caught up in it too. And then my dad disappeared. The silence in the room was deafening. The weight of her words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She had never spoken about it like this before. Not in such detail. She'd buried it deep, convinced that it was the only way to survive. But as the words left her mouth, she realized something. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She had let the truth spill out, raw and unfiltered, and it felt like a release. Like an invisible burden had been lifted off her shoulders. Keanu reached over and placed a hand gently on hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let herself feel the warmth of his touch, the reassurance it gave her. Lily, Sarah spoke softly, her voice filled with compassion. This is important. What you've just told me, it's a part of something bigger. Your father wasn't just involved in something illegal. He was part of a network, a dangerous one. And if these people are still after you, it's because of that. They want what your father had. They want you, because you're connected to it. Lily felt the room spin around her, her breath coming in short, uneven bursts. You mean, you think they're after me because of him? Sarah nodded, her expression firm. Yes, they've been looking for you ever since he disappeared. And now that they've found you, they won't stop until they get what they want. Lily's world seemed to collapse in on itself. This was bigger than she had thought, bigger than she had ever imagined. But there was something in Sarah's voice, something determined. They won't stop until they get what they want. Keanu squeezed her hand gently. We're not going to let them take you, Lily. We'll figure this out together. Lily looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what came next, but for the first time in a long time, she had hope. The truth had finally been revealed, and though the road ahead was uncertain, she knew one thing. She didn't have to face it alone. Lily sat back against the couch, her mind spinning with the revelations Sarah had just dropped. The room felt smaller, suffocating even, and the walls seemed to close in around her with every passing second. Her father's past, the dangerous network, they were still out there, after her. She couldn't escape it, not anymore. Keanu, sensing the overwhelming weight of the situation, shifted beside her, keeping his presence steady and grounded. "Lily," he said softly, his voice strong yet filled with compassion, "we're going to figure this out, okay? You don't have to carry this burden alone anymore." Lily wanted to believe him. She truly did. But a gnawing fear, like a cold weight settling in her chest, refused to let go. She had spent years running, trying to bury her past, and now, just when she thought she had finally found some peace, it had come crashing back into her life with a vengeance. She looked up at Sarah, who was watching her with a calm, almost expectant expression. "What now?" Lily asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Sarah leaned forward, folding her hands on the table as if preparing to lay out a plan. "Now, we need to understand exactly what's at stake here," she said, her tone businesslike. But there was a spark of something more, an understanding of how dangerous this situation really was. "We need to know everything your father was involved in and what he left behind. I'm guessing he didn't leave a trail that's easy to follow." Lily nodded, her throat tight. "He kept everything secret, even from me. I didn't know what he was mixed up in until it was too late." Keanu turned his gaze to Sarah. "So, what do we do now? Where do we go from here?" Sarah sat back for a moment, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the table as she considered her next move. "First, we need to find out more about these people who are after you. If they've been looking for you all this time, there's a reason. And that reason is tied to whatever your father was involved in." Lily shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the weight of her father's past settling on her once more. She had never wanted to face the truth about him. She had convinced herself that his disappearance was just a tragic, random event, something that could never be explained. But now, she had no choice but to confront it. "And what if they find me before we can figure this out?" Lily asked, her voice tinged with fear. "What if they're already looking for me?" Sarah met her gaze head-on, her eyes unwavering. "That's why we need to act quickly. We'll have to move carefully, gather as much intel as we can, and stay one step ahead of them. But rest assured, Lily, they won't find you easily, not with us on your side." Lily wasn't sure if she believed that, but she nodded, grateful for the confidence Sarah had in her. There was a strength in Sarah's demeanor that made Lily feel a little less alone. And Keanu was here. He hadn't walked away when things got difficult. That meant something. "What do we do first?" Lily asked, her voice firmer now. She had made it this far and she couldn't stop now, not when the stakes were so high. Sarah gave her a small, approving smile. "First, we need to get a handle on the people looking for you. There's a network of contacts I have, people who can dig into this sort of thing. But we need to be discreet. We can't afford to alert anyone that we're onto them." Keanu nodded. "We'll be careful. Just tell us where to start." Lily turned to Keanu, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. She had no idea what the next step was, but she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could figure this out. But even as they spoke about their plans, something in the back of Lily's mind nagged at her. She couldn't shake the image of the man who had approached her on the street, the one who had been so sure of himself, so certain that he could control the situation. What was it about him that made her feel so uneasy? How did he know so much about her? "Sarah," Lily spoke up suddenly, her voice tentative. "What about the man who found me? The one who said he knew my secret. Do you think he's connected to these people?" Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly, a calculating look crossing her features. "It's possible. It's even likely. But we need more information before we can make that assumption. He might be part of the network, or he could be acting on his own. Either way, he's dangerous, and we need to figure out who he is before we do anything else." Lily nodded slowly, her mind racing. Every piece of this puzzle felt like it was slipping through her fingers just as fast as she tried to put it together. The danger was closing in, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep it all together. Later that night, Lily found herself sitting in a small, darkened room at Sarah's place, her eyes fixed on the laptop in front of her. Keanu had stepped out to grab them some food, and Sarah had promised to start making calls, reaching out to her network for any leads on the people Lily's father had been involved with. For now, it was just Lily and the silence, the quiet buzzing of the laptop as it scanned through the data Sarah had given her. It was all so overwhelming, so much more than she had expected when she first met Keanu. She had thought their connection would be a simple escape, a way out of the chaos she'd created. But now, the deeper she dug into her father's life, the more she realized that there was no escaping it. The mess was so much bigger than her. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden vibration of her phone on the table. She glanced down at the screen, an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat, the dread rising in her chest. She didn't want to answer it. She couldn't. But at the same time, she couldn't afford not to. With shaking hands, she picked up the phone and answered. "Lily," the voice on the other end said, and her blood ran cold. It was him, the man from the street. "I told you I'd be in touch." His voice was low, almost amused. "And now it's time for you to make a decision. Do things the easy way, or the hard way. I think you already know what's at stake." Lily's breath caught in her throat, but she forced herself to speak. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "You know what I want," he replied, his tone sharp. "I want the information your father hid, and you're the only one who can give it to me. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Lily sat there, the phone still pressed to her ear, the blood pounding in her head. The web was closing in faster than she could track, and she was right in the middle of it. She didn't know how much longer she could stay one step ahead. But she wasn't giving up, not now. Not when everything she cared about was on the line. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Lily sat back, her heart racing as she stared at the blank screen of her phone. The man's words still echoed in her head, cold and final. "I want the information your father hid, and you're the only one who can give it to me." She had heard the threat in his voice, and the chill in the pit of her stomach told her that he wasn't someone to take lightly. The room around her felt increasingly claustrophobic, the tension thick in the air. She looked at the clock on the wall, almost midnight. Keanu hadn't come back yet, and for a moment, Lily felt utterly alone. The silence pressed in on her, and she could feel the weight of everything she was trying to escape from, closing in once again. She had no idea what this man wanted from her, but one thing was clear. The danger was very real, and it wasn't going away. She placed the phone back on the table, her hands trembling. What was it my father hid? Lily thought, running her fingers through her hair in frustration. She had been too young to understand, too naive to realize the significance of her father's secrets. But now, the man on the other end of that call had made it clear that she was the key, whether she wanted to be or not. The soft click of the door opening caught her attention. She looked up to see Keanu stepping back into the room, carrying 2 bags of takeout. His eyes softened when he saw her, and the sight of him, steady, unwavering, was a small comfort in the whirlwind of chaos. "Hey," he said, setting the bags down on the table and giving her a look that held a mixture of concern and understanding. "You okay?" Lily didn't answer immediately. Instead, she just nodded and forced a weak smile. "Yeah, I'm fine," she lied. Her mind was still reeling from the phone call, and she was desperately trying to hold herself together. She didn't want to burden Keanu any more than she already had. He had enough on his plate, with everything that was going on. Keanu seemed to sense the distance in her, the weight of her silence. He didn't push her, though. Instead, he pulled out a chair and sat down beside her, placing one of the takeout bags in front of her. "Lily," he said gently, his tone soft but firm, "I know you're scared. Hell, I'm scared too. But we're going to get through this, okay? You don't have to go through this alone. I'm not leaving you, no matter what happens." The sincerity in his voice made something inside her crack, just a little. She had spent so many years keeping everyone at arm's length, pushing people away because she didn't want to get hurt again. But Keanu had stayed. He had stuck by her when she didn't deserve it, when she was nothing but a stranger to him. And now, he was here, offering her something she had never really known: trust. "I don't know what to do anymore, Keanu," Lily confessed, her voice shaking slightly. "The man who called me, he said he wants the information my father hid, and I don't even know what he's talking about. All I know is that I've been running for so long, and it feels like it's all coming to a head." Keanu's expression darkened, but he reached out and gently took her hand in his. "We'll figure it out. We have to. But I need you to be honest with me, Lily. Tell me everything you know about your father's past. If we're going to face this together, we need to know exactly what we're up against." Lily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had to tell him everything. There was no other way forward. If they were going to survive whatever was coming, they had to face it together. No secrets, no lies. "My dad, he was involved in something dangerous. I didn't understand it when I was a kid, but now, I think I do. He wasn't just a regular guy. He was tangled up with a criminal network. And when I found out about it, everything changed. He tried to protect me, tried to get me out of it, but it didn't work. They took him, Keanu. I think they're the ones who caused him to disappear." Keanu's jaw clenched at the mention of her father. "I'm sorry, Lily. I can't even imagine what that must have been like for you." Lily shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. She blinked them back, unwilling to let herself fall apart. "Not now. It's not just that. It's what he left behind. I don't know what it was, some kind of information, some key to something, but whatever it is, it's what they're after. And now, I'm the only one left who can give it to them." Keanu's grip on her hand tightened, his gaze unwavering. "You don't have to give them anything, Lily. You don't owe them anything. We'll find a way out of this. We'll get you the answers you need, and we'll make sure you're safe." Lily squeezed his hand back, trying to find the strength to believe him. "But I don't even know where to start. I don't know what my father was mixed up in, and these people they're dangerous, Keanu. I don't know if I can outsmart them again. I don't even know if I can keep running." Keanu leaned in closer, his voice soft but filled with determination. "You're not alone in this. I promise you. Whatever happens, I'm with you. I'll help you find the answers. We'll face this head on. Together." Lily felt a swell of emotion rise in her chest, threatening to overwhelm her. She had been so terrified, so consumed with fear that she had been pushing people away. But now, with Keanu by her side, maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this. Maybe she didn't have to carry the weight of her father's secrets alone. Keanu's hand still held hers, warm and steady, a constant reminder that she wasn't facing this battle by herself. She took a deep breath, trying to steady the whirlwind inside her. "Okay," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "Okay, we'll figure this out. We have to." As the night wore on, the two of them sat together in silence, only the sound of the ticking clock and their soft breathing filling the room. It was strange, this quiet. The world outside seemed so distant now, as if everything was frozen in place, waiting for something to change. But Lily knew that change was inevitable. They were no longer running from the past. It had caught up with them, and now they had to face it head-on. When the clock struck 2 a.m., Sarah finally returned. Her expression was grim, but her eyes held the same quiet strength that had put Lily at ease earlier. "We've got a lead," Sarah said, her voice low but firm. "It's not much, but it's something. We need to move quickly. They're already looking for you, Lily, and we don't have much time." Lily stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear: this wasn't over. Not yet. But with Keanu and Sarah by her side, she felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. The cold morning light filtered through the window, casting long shadows on the floor. Lily sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee forgotten in front of her, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge. The lead Sarah had mentioned last night had turned out to be more promising than Lily could have hoped for, but it came with its own set of risks. Now, there was no turning back. Keanu had already left to gather more supplies, leaving Lily and Sarah alone to finalize their plan. The weight of the upcoming journey settled heavily on her shoulders, and yet there was a strange sense of clarity in her mind. She had to do this, not just for herself, but for her father. Whoever these people were, they had taken so much from her already. It was time to take back control. Sarah walked into the kitchen, her phone pressed against her ear. She nodded as she listened to the person on the other end, her expression hardening with every passing second. She glanced at Lily, her eyes sharp. "We're running out of time. They're getting closer." Lily's stomach churned, but she steadied herself. "What does that mean, exactly?" "They've already made contact with someone on our side," Sarah said, lowering her voice as she ended the call. "Someone we can't trust." Lily's heart skipped a beat. "Who? How do you know?" Sarah ran a hand through her hair, clearly frustrated. "It's someone I've worked with before. He's been feeding information to the other side. He's the one who tipped them off about us. They know we're coming." Lily's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't even considered the possibility of someone betraying them. Not like this. "So, we're walking into a trap?" "Not exactly," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the anxiety creeping in. "We can still make this work. But we have to be careful. We need to keep our movements tight and avoid drawing attention. We can't afford to make a single mistake." Lily nodded, trying to push the fear aside. There was no time for second-guessing now. This was happening, and they had to be prepared for whatever came next. Keanu returned shortly after, his face set in a determined expression as he placed a duffel bag on the table, packed with everything they would need. "Ready to move?" he asked, looking from Lily to Sarah. Lily swallowed hard, her throat dry. She wasn't sure she'd ever truly be ready, but she nodded. "Let's do this." Sarah motioned toward the door. "We're heading to an old storage unit downtown. It's not much, but it's where the contact said to meet. We'll find answers there, I'm sure of it." As they made their way out the door, Lily's mind raced. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every car that passed felt too slow, too deliberate. She glanced over her shoulder more than once, half expecting someone to jump out at them. Keanu walked beside her, his pace steady, his presence reassuring. He was in his element now, calm and focused. But Lily could feel the tension in the air, like a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. When they reached the storage facility, the place looked abandoned, its metal doors rusted and chipped from years of neglect. It seemed like the kind of place where secrets were buried, where things went to die. And yet, it was here that they hoped to find something that could change everything. Sarah led the way, taking a key from her pocket and unlocking the door. The sound of the lock clicking open echoed through the empty hallway, and Lily's heart skipped a beat. They stepped inside, the dim light from a single overhead bulb casting long shadows across the concrete floor. "Where's the contact?" Keanu asked, his eyes scanning the area warily. Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped further into the room, her eyes trained on a wooden crate in the corner. "This is it," she said quietly, her voice tight with anticipation. Lily approached the crate cautiously, her stomach twisting in knots. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew that whatever they found here would set the course for everything to come. The answers they were searching for, the truth about her father. This was the moment. With a sharp intake of breath, Sarah lifted the lid of the crate. Inside, there were stacks of documents, some old, some yellowed with age, and others still in pristine condition. The papers were neatly organized, as though someone had made sure that everything was in its place. Lily's heart pounded as she stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached for the first stack. This is it," she whispered. "This is the key," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "Everything your father was involved in, everything he was trying to hide. It's all here." Keanu moved closer, peering over Lily's shoulder at the papers. "What's on them?" he asked. Lily didn't answer immediately. She picked up the first document, her eyes scanning the words, trying to make sense of the complex codes and jargon written across the pages. She recognized a few names, ones that made her blood run cold. But it wasn't until she flipped through more pages that the full extent of her father's involvement began to reveal itself. He had been mixed up in more than just one criminal organization. These were not just petty criminals. They were connected to global networks, smuggling rings, money laundering, and even darker dealings. And somewhere within these pages was the information they needed to piece it all together. But then, as Lily read further, one name stood out, a name she hadn't expected to see. Her father's name was written there, tied to something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. He wasn't just hiding information. He was the key. He had been the mastermind behind a much larger operation, one that had its roots in some of the darkest corners of the world. Lily's vision blurred for a moment as she processed the gravity of what she was reading. Her father had been involved in something huge, something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. And now, the people who wanted these documents were coming for them. Her grip tightened on the papers, and she looked up at Keanu and Sarah, her face pale. "We have to go. Now." Sarah nodded immediately, her expression grim. "Get what you can. We're not safe here." Keanu stepped forward, helping Lily collect the papers, his eyes scanning the room warily. But before they could make it to the door, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. They weren't alone. Lily's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, everything stopped. They had walked into a trap. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. Lily's pulse quickened as she looked around frantically, her mind racing for a plan. The walls of the storage unit felt like they were closing in on her. Her heart hammered in her chest, and for a split second, she almost thought she was paralyzed by fear. "Move now," Sarah hissed, grabbing Lily by the arm and yanking her toward the back exit. Keanu was already ahead, his eyes sharp, scanning for any possible escape routes. The papers were still clutched tightly in Lily's hands, but she didn't even register them at this point. Her only focus was getting out alive. Lily followed Sarah, adrenaline pumping through her veins, as they dashed down a narrow corridor that led to the rear of the building. The footsteps behind them were unmistakable now, heavier, more deliberate. Someone was gaining on them. "Keanu!" Sarah shouted over her shoulder. "We need to move faster." Keanu glanced back, his eyes narrowing as he noticed the growing pursuit. Without a word, he broke into a sprint, pushing them forward. They reached a door at the end of the hallway, but it was locked. "Great," Sarah muttered, slamming her fist against the door. "We're not going anywhere if this thing doesn't open." Lily's breath caught in her throat as the footsteps grew louder. Whoever was after them wasn't wasting time. The door was their only chance. She looked at Sarah, her mind whirling. "Do you have the key?" Sarah shook her head. "No, this wasn't part of the plan. We've got to improvise." Lily's fingers shook as she pulled the papers tighter to her chest, but her mind was working overtime, searching for any possible solution. She darted her eyes around the small hallway, looking for something, anything, that could help. The steel door, the dim light. It felt like a trap. Then, an idea hit her. She turned back to Sarah. "The windows. We can break the window. Get out that way." Keanu cursed under his breath, moving to the far end of the corridor to assess their options. "If we break a window, they'll hear it. We don't have the element of surprise anymore." Lily didn't care about the element of surprise. If they didn't act fast, it wouldn't matter. "We don't have time to debate. We're running out of options." Before Sarah could argue, Lily rushed forward, kicking off her shoes and slamming her foot against the small window in the hallway. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, echoing through the building. As shards of glass fell to the floor, Lily didn't wait for the dust to settle. She pushed herself through the jagged opening, landing hard on the ground outside. Keanu was next, squeezing through the window with ease despite his size. Sarah followed closely behind, her eyes sharp as she surveyed their surroundings. They had just exited into an alleyway behind the storage facility, nowhere to run unless they moved fast. "Go," Keanu ordered. "We've got maybe a minute before they're on us. They'll be coming around from the front." Lily didn't need any more convincing. She bolted forward, her legs pumping beneath her as she raced through the alley, her breath ragged and her mind still reeling from the close call. The papers were still with her, tucked under her arm, but she barely even thought about them now. Her only thought was escape. They rounded a corner into a busier street, weaving through pedestrians and cars. Lily glanced back once, only to see the shadow of a figure turning the corner behind them. Someone was in pursuit. Keanu pushed ahead, his stride long and confident as he led them through the crowded street. Sarah was right behind him, her eyes darting in every direction, constantly scanning for threats. Lily stayed close to Keanu, trying to blend in with the crowd, though she knew it was only a matter of time before they were spotted. A few blocks later, they ducked into a cafe, sliding through the door just as a black SUV rolled by. They were momentarily safe, but only momentarily. Sarah immediately scanned the room, picking a table in the far corner near the window. "We need to lay low, figure out our next move." Keanu was already seated, his hand gripping the back of the chair tightly. "We need to get out of here. They'll be looking for us, and staying in one place for too long isn't a good idea." Lily barely heard him. She was too focused on what was still in her hands. The papers. The answers. Her mind was already racing, trying to make sense of the information she just uncovered. Her father wasn't just hiding documents. He had been at the center of something much bigger, something that was still alive and dangerous. She had the answers they needed, but now she had to figure out what to do with them before it was too late. "Lily?" Keanu's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. "Are you okay?" She looked up at him, suddenly aware of how shaky her hands were. She forced herself to take a deep breath. "I don't know what to do with all of this, Keanu. It's too much. My dad. He wasn't just trying to protect me. He was protecting all of us, from something so much bigger." "Lily, listen to me," Keanu said, his tone gentle but firm. "We're going to figure it out. But you have to trust me. You don't have to carry this burden alone anymore." She swallowed hard, looking at him. His words gave her some sense of comfort, but the weight of everything still hung heavy on her shoulders. The truth about her father had changed everything. She couldn't turn back now, even if she wanted to. Keanu leaned forward, speaking in a low voice. "The only way we get through this is by keeping our heads down, staying a step ahead, and sticking together. I'm not letting you face this on your own." Lily felt a surge of gratitude, mixed with something else, a flicker of hope. She had been running for so long, alone, scared, and now she wasn't. But that hope was fleeting as her phone buzzed on the table, breaking the moment of quiet connection. It was a message from an unknown number. "You can't run forever. The game has just begun." Her heart dropped, the weight of her father's past crashing back into her. The chase wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The buzzing of Lily's phone felt like a loud crash in the otherwise quiet cafe. She stared at the message, her fingers frozen on the screen. "You can't run forever. The game has just begun." The words hit her like a punch to the gut, every syllable loaded with the threat of something far worse than she could have imagined. She looked up at Keanu and Sarah, both of them watching her closely. "What's wrong?" Keanu asked, his brow furrowed as he leaned in. Lily showed them the phone, her voice barely above a whisper. "They know where we are. It's them. They're closing in." Sarah's gaze narrowed, her hand reaching for her own phone. She was already tapping away, trying to gather more intel. "Whoever this is, they're good. Too good." Keanu exhaled sharply, his hand tightening around the cup in front of him. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to come to us." Lily nodded. She knew that better than anyone. She had been running for years, but now she was running with purpose. No longer just to survive, but to find the truth about her father's legacy and put an end to it all. And yet, the more she uncovered, the more it seemed like she was getting sucked into an even deeper, darker web. The door to the cafe opened, and a couple of customers stepped inside. But Lily's heart skipped a beat when she noticed someone out of the corner of her eye. A man, tall, with dark sunglasses and a black coat, standing just inside the entrance, scanning the room. Her breath hitched. "He's looking for us." Keanu's eyes followed hers, and without a word, he stood up. "We're leaving. Now." Lily grabbed her bag, clutching it tightly as the three of them rose in sync. Sarah was already moving toward the exit, keeping a sharp eye on the man, while Keanu led the way. They moved quickly, trying to blend in with the afternoon rush, but Lily could feel the weight of every second. They slipped out the back of the cafe and into an alleyway, the door slamming shut behind them. Keanu pulled them down the narrow passage, his movements swift and precise. We need to keep moving. They've got eyes on us, and we can't afford to stay in one place. Lily's mind was spinning. She had no idea how they had tracked them so quickly. She couldn't help but wonder, who else is involved in this? Keanu seemed to read her mind. They've been following us for a while now. Whoever's after you has resources. We're going to need to go underground, at least for a while. Sarah was quiet, her face grim as she checked her phone again. I've got some contacts who can help, but it's going to be risky. We'll have to lay low, stay out of sight. Lily nodded. Where do we go? First, Sarah said, we're going to get off the grid. We're taking a different route to the safe house. It's not far, but we can't risk getting caught in the open. The three of them kept walking, blending into the crowd of pedestrians, careful not to draw attention. But with every step, the pressure mounted. The feeling that they were being watched, that the walls were closing in on them, was impossible to shake. As they approached a side street, Sarah turned to them. We need to get on a different route, avoid surveillance. I know a place nearby where we can stay for a while, but we'll need to move fast. They crossed a few blocks, weaving through alleyways, staying out of sight. Every corner they turned, Lily half expected someone to jump out at them, to confront them with the truth she had been avoiding for so long. Every step was a risk, but she had no choice. Finally, Sarah led them down a narrow street to an unmarked door. She knocked twice, waited, then knocked again. The door creaked open just enough for them to slip inside. The moment they were in, the door slammed shut behind them. The room was dark, the only light coming from a single overhead bulb that flickered intermittently. The walls were bare, the furniture sparse. It looked like an abandoned storage room, exactly the kind of place where people like them could disappear for a while. Sarah turned to Keanu and Lily. We'll stay here for a bit. I've got some calls to make, contacts who can help us move on from here. Lily felt the tension in the air, the constant fear that they were being hunted. She couldn't stop thinking about her father. The more she learned, the more questions she had. What was he involved in? Why was he trying to protect me from this? Keanu, sensing her distress, stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're doing great, Lily. We're one step ahead, and we're going to stay one step ahead. They won't get you. Lily met his gaze, trying to read the sincerity in his eyes. She had to believe him. After everything they had been through together, after the way he'd stood by her, she had to believe that they could make it out of this alive. But her thoughts were interrupted when Sarah's voice broke the silence. I've got something. She was standing near the corner, phone pressed to her ear, listening intently. When she finished the call, her expression was serious. That man we saw in the cafe? He's one of them. He's connected to a group that's been hunting down everyone involved in this. And now, they know you're alive. Lily's heart sank. How do we stop them? We can't, Sarah replied bluntly. At least, not yet. But there's someone who might have answers. Someone who knew your father. Lily's breath caught. Who? A contact. Someone from your father's past. They've been hiding for years, but they know everything. They can help us make sense of this. Lily's mind raced. A person who knew her father. This could be the key to everything. But as Sarah spoke, Lily felt the weight of the truth settle over her. Her father had been involved in something so large, so dangerous, that it was impossible to escape. Where do we find them? Keanu asked, his voice steady. Sarah paused, glancing between the two of them. We'll have to go to them, but it's not going to be easy. They don't trust anyone, especially now. It could take days, even weeks, to track them down. Lily felt the pressure mounting again. The more she uncovered, the deeper the rabbit hole seemed to go. I thought I could outrun this, but now it feels like I'm running toward it. She looked at Keanu, her eyes tired but determined. I have to find the truth, Keanu. I have to know what happened to my father. It's the only way I can stop this. Keanu placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm. We'll find it together. But as they prepared to leave the room, the faint sound of sirens in the distance began to rise. They had no time to waste. The game had begun, and there was no turning back. The sirens grew louder, and Lily's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her, the truth about her father's involvement in something far darker than she could have imagined, and the undeniable reality that they were running out of time. Every step, every turn, felt like it was leading them deeper into a labyrinth of secrets and lies, and there was no way out. Keanu was already by the door, checking the street through the cracked window. "We need to move. Now," he said, his voice low but urgent. His gaze flicked back to Lily and Sarah. "They're closer than we thought. We've got maybe 10 minutes before the place is swarming with them." Sarah, who had been pacing back and forth, nodded. "Let's go. We'll stick to the back alleys. It's the fastest way out of here." Lily felt her legs tremble as she stood up. She wasn't sure if it was from fear or exhaustion, but it didn't matter. The world outside was waiting, and it wasn't going to wait for her to catch up. Keanu moved first, leading the way down the narrow hallway. Sarah followed close behind, and Lily, clutching the bundle of papers in her arms, stayed right on their heels. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the otherwise silent building as they moved swiftly through the dark corridors. There was no room for hesitation. As they exited the back door into another alley, the cool night air hit them like a wave. The city's glow cast long shadows against the walls, and the quiet hum of traffic was a stark contrast to the adrenaline coursing through Lily's veins. She glanced back, her pulse racing. Every fiber of her being told her they were being watched, followed. "Keep moving," Keanu urged, his voice calm but carrying a sense of urgency that made Lily's heart race even faster. He knew they were out of time, just as much as she did. The alley twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the heart of the city. Lily tried to keep her breath steady, but every corner they rounded felt like another step toward something they couldn't see yet. Something far worse than anything they had faced so far. As they reached a quieter street, Sarah pulled out her phone and tapped a few buttons, waiting for a response. Lily looked at her, the tension in the air palpable. She knew they needed answers, but Sarah's stoic expression told her that whatever they were about to hear wouldn't be easy. Finally, Sarah looked up from her phone, her eyes dark with what could only be described as grim determination. "I've got a lead. There's a place, a safe house we can go to. It's off the grid, but we need to hurry." "Where is it?" Keanu asked, glancing around to make sure they weren't being followed. Sarah hesitated, then gave him a quick, decisive nod. "It's a few miles from here. We'll have to take a cab." Lily swallowed hard, trying to keep the fear from bubbling to the surface. "What happens once we get there?" "We meet the contact," Sarah said, her voice grim, "and we find out what's really going on." Lily nodded, her grip tightening around the papers. Her mind was spinning. Is this really the truth I've been searching for? She hadn't been prepared for this, for the sheer scope of her father's involvement in whatever dark web they had stumbled into. But now, there was no turning back. Keanu flagged down a cab, his eyes scanning the streets. As they piled into the back seat, the world outside seemed to fade away for a moment. The cab pulled out into the night, winding through the city streets as they sped toward their destination. The hum of the engine and the soft chatter from the driver did little to calm Lily's nerves. She couldn't stop thinking about what Sarah had said. We find out what's really going on. Lily had been living in the shadows for so long, running from one danger to the next. But now, she was about to face the heart of the storm. She couldn't shake the feeling that her entire life had been a lie, that everything she thought she knew about her father, about her own past, was just a mask. The cab finally slowed to a stop outside an unmarked building. The street was dimly lit, the only sound the rustling of leaves from a nearby tree. Keanu was the first to get out, followed closely by Sarah and then Lily. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine as they approached the door, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. This was it. They were about to step into the unknown. Sarah knocked once, then twice. The door opened almost immediately, revealing a middle-aged man with a weathered face and sharp eyes. He glanced over his shoulder before stepping aside to let them in. "Come in," he said quietly, his voice low. "We don't have much time." Lily stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind them. The dim light of the room barely illuminated the space, but she could make out the outlines of a few chairs and a table covered in papers. It felt like a safe house, cramped, hidden, designed to keep people off the radar. The man turned to them, his gaze flicking from Sarah to Keanu, and then settling on Lily. There was something about the way he looked at her that made her stomach churn. It was as if he already knew everything about her, everything about her father. "I assume you're Lily," he said, his voice soft but knowing. "Your father spoke about you often." Lily felt a knot tighten in her chest. "What do you know about my father?" The man hesitated for a moment before answering, his eyes darkening. "I know more than you might want to hear. But first, you need to understand something." He stepped closer, his tone serious. "Your father wasn't just a bystander in all this. He was part of it. And now, so are you." Lily's mind spun as the words sank in. The truth about her father, about everything he had hidden from her, was starting to surface. But she wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. Not yet. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man looked at her intently. "You've stumbled into something much bigger than you realize, Lily. This isn't just about your father's secrets. It's about a network, a web of power and corruption that goes deep. Your father was at the center of it. And now that you've found these papers," he trailed off, his eyes narrowing, "you've made yourself a target." Lily's heart skipped a beat. A target. It was a word she'd feared for so long, but now it was real. She was in the middle of something that was far bigger, more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. "Who's after us?" Keanu asked, his voice steady despite the growing tension in the room. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the table, picking up a stack of papers. He shuffled through them before placing one on the table in front of Lily. Lily picked it up and stared at the familiar name, her father's name, and beneath it, a list of figures she recognized, connected to the criminal underworld in ways she couldn't yet understand. The man looked at her, his voice cold. "They're not just after you, Lily. They're after everything, and they'll stop at nothing to get it." The web was closing in, and Lily realized, with a sinking heart, that she had no idea just how deep the rabbit hole went. Lily's hands trembled as she stared at the paper in front of her. Her father's name loomed at the top of the page, his signature scrawled beneath it. The list of figures below made her blood run cold. These were powerful people, some of whom she had heard whispers about over the years. Mob bosses, corrupt politicians, shady businessmen. But to see their names all linked together, connected by her father, made her stomach churn. The man standing in front of them, the one who had brought them here, watched her closely, his eyes never leaving her face. "This is what you're dealing with, Lily. Your father was more involved in this network than you ever realized. You're not just the daughter of a man who worked for them. You're part of it now. You've inherited more than just his legacy. You've inherited the consequences of his actions." Keanu stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "How do you know all this? And who exactly are you?" The man didn't flinch, but there was a hint of a smile at the edge of his lips. "My name is Gregor. I was one of your father's closest allies before everything went sideways. But when things got out of hand, I had to disappear. I've been underground for years, waiting for the right moment to step back into the game. And now, it seems that moment has arrived." He paused, looking at Lily, then Keanu. "Your father's involvement in this network is deeper than you think. He was trying to protect you from it, but there was no way to shield you forever." Lily swallowed hard, trying to process the weight of what Gregor was saying. She had always known there were things her father had kept from her, but she never imagined this. He hadn't just been a simple businessman or a man trying to protect his family. He had been tangled in a web of corruption, manipulation, and power. A web that now threatened to swallow her whole. "Why didn't he tell me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Gregor's expression darkened. "He was trying to keep you safe. There were people after him, after both of you, for years. He kept you hidden from the truth because he thought it would protect you. But now that you've uncovered some of it, there's no turning back." Keanu shook his head. "But why? Why is she a target now? What do they want from her?" Gregor's gaze shifted toward the stack of papers on the table. "The documents you found, they're the key. Your father had information, critical information about the people running this network. The kind of information that could bring it all down. But it's not just about what's on those papers. It's about who has them and what they can do with them. Lily's stomach twisted. So much for having all the answers. She had thought these papers would be the key to unlocking her father's secrets, but now it felt like she had just opened the door to an even darker world. And what happens now? You need to get those papers out of here, Gregor replied. They'll stop at nothing to get them back. You're not safe here. Lily glanced at Keanu, who was already moving toward the door, his eyes scanning the room, alert. We can't keep running forever. We need to find a way to stop them. Gregor's eyes flickered with something that almost resembled pity. You can't stop them. Not alone. You'll need allies, people who are more connected, more powerful than you realize. The people after you? They're everywhere. They've got eyes and ears in every corner of the world. And they've been watching you for a long time. Lily felt the weight of those words settle over her like a heavy cloak. She had thought she could outrun this, that the truth would set her free. But now, all she felt was trapped in a world where every move she made was being watched. So, what's the plan? Keanu asked, his voice firm, refusing to back down. We move. But we can't go public with this yet. If they know you're alive, they'll come for you harder than ever. We need to go dark, disappear, Gregor said, his eyes shifting to Lily. And you need to prepare for the reality of your father's choices. He wasn't just trying to protect you. He was running from something much bigger than you realize. Lily's heart pounded in her chest as she processed the magnitude of what he was saying. What do you mean, bigger? What exactly was he running from? Gregor didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to a table in the corner of the room, picking up a file and handing it to her. This will help you understand. It's everything your father was trying to protect you from. The people he was trying to keep you away from. It's all in there. Lily hesitated for a moment before taking the file from him. Her hands shook as she flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the contents. Each page was filled with information about the same name she had seen before, but now there were more details, detailed descriptions, addresses, and encrypted communications. They're everywhere, Lily murmured, her voice cracking as the weight of the situation hit her. How could one man have been involved in all of this? Gregor's expression softened slightly, but there was no warmth in his gaze. Your father didn't have a choice, Lily. This is a network that controls everything. Politicians, law enforcement, corporations, even governments. Your father was part of it, but he didn't want to be. He was trying to get out. But now, they know you have the information he left behind. And they'll come for you, no matter where you go. Lily's head spun. There was no escaping this. No running away from the truth anymore. Keanu stepped in closer, his hand resting on her shoulder. We'll face this together, Lily. We'll get through this. But even as he said the words, Lily wasn't sure she believed them. The world had changed overnight. They weren't just running from a few people anymore. They were up against a system. A network so vast and powerful that it seemed impossible to fight back. Where do we go from here? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. Gregor sighed, his eyes hardening again. First, we leave. You can't stay here, not with what's on that paper. You need to get to a place where they can't find you. After that, we'll figure out the next move. Lily nodded, her mind racing. She had no idea how they could escape this web. But one thing was clear. The journey ahead was going to be the fight of her life. And she wasn't sure if they would make it out alive. Let's move, Keanu said, turning toward the door. We don't have much time. They didn't. The clock was ticking, and the walls were closing in. The night air had never felt so cold. It wasn't the chill that cut through your bones, but the weight of the unknown pressing in from all sides. Lily's breath misted in the air as she moved quickly through the darkened streets, her thoughts a whirlwind. The file Gregor had handed her felt like a ticking time bomb in her hands. Every page, every name, was another thread pulling her deeper into the heart of a conspiracy she hadn't even begun to comprehend. Keanu kept pace beside her, his body tense, his eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. Sarah walked a few steps ahead, her phone in her hand, a frown etched on her face as she scanned for any signs of danger. Lily couldn't help but wonder how they had all ended up here. How one innocent question, one desperate plea for answers, had spiraled into a full-blown nightmare. Where are we going? Lily asked, her voice hoarse. She didn't expect an answer. Not really. They were running, fleeing, just one step ahead of whatever was coming. We're heading to a place that's off the radar, Keanu replied quietly. A safe house, if you want to call it that. It's where we can regroup, lay low for a while. Lily nodded, trying to steady her breath, trying to clear her mind. The words kept circling in her head. Your father wasn't just trying to protect you. He was running from something much bigger than you realize. But it wasn't just about what Gregor had told her. It was everything that had come before. The strange, cryptic phone calls. The unexplained trips her father had taken. The way he'd kept her at arm's length when she tried to get closer, to understand him. She had thought it was just his overprotectiveness. But now, she realized it was so much more. The safe house was in the heart of the city, hidden behind a nondescript door in a dilapidated building that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. It was a place that didn't draw attention, and in this city, that was exactly what they needed. The moment they stepped inside, it was like the world outside had faded away. The air was stale, and the room was small, lit only by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. But it was quiet, and for the first time in days, Lily allowed herself a moment to breathe. Gregor was already inside, sitting at a table, rifling through a stack of papers. His eyes flicked up when they entered, his expression unreadable. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chairs around the table. We've got work to do. Keanu moved to the window, drawing the curtains and locking the door behind them. Sarah took a seat across from Gregor, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. What now? She asked. Gregor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for a map spread out on the table. He unfolded it, showing them various marked locations across the city. Dots connected by lines that formed an intricate web. These are the points of interest, Gregor said, his voice low and deliberate. These are places your father was connected to, places he knew too well. He was trying to get to them before they did. But the ones who are after you, they've been watching you all along. They know about the papers you have, and they'll do whatever it takes to get them. Lily felt a knot in her stomach. How could they have been watching her all this time? She had no idea that every move she made had been tracked. So, we run, Keanu said, his voice steady, but there was something in his eyes that told Lily he was just as overwhelmed as she was. We keep moving, don't stop. We keep the papers safe. Gregor shook his head. Running won't help you. They're everywhere. They've infiltrated every part of this city. You can't just hide. Lily leaned in, her eyes narrowing. Then what do we do? We can't fight this, whatever it is. How do we stop them? Gregor's expression softened, but only slightly. The first step is to understand what you're up against. They don't just want your father's information, they want control. Your father had a plan, but it wasn't just about escaping. He was trying to destroy them from the inside. You need to finish what he started. Lily's heart raced. Destroy them? It seemed impossible. How could one person, or even a small group of people, take down something so vast, so deeply entrenched? And how do we do that? Sarah asked, clearly skeptical. You said yourself we can't just run. Gregor's eyes flicked toward Lily. You've got something they want, Lily. You've got the key to all of this. But you have to be willing to make a choice. Are you ready to go all in? Because if you're not, then you're as good as dead. Lily felt the weight of his words settle over her like a heavy cloak. Dead. She had been running from death for so long, but now it was staring her in the face. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something far bigger. She looked at Keanu, who had been watching her silently. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a determination that matched her own. We do this together, he said quietly. Lily nodded. What's the plan? Gregor leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the map on the table. The first thing you need to do is go to one of these places. It's not a safe house, but it's a starting point. It's a place where you can meet others who are on the same side, people who are trying to bring this network down. Once you make contact, you'll get access to resources, people who can help you fight back. Lily felt a spark of hope, but it was dim, barely a flicker in the overwhelming darkness. And what happens if we don't succeed? Gregor's eyes hardened. You'll be dead, or worse. And the people who want you will get exactly what they want. Lily's chest tightened. There was no going back now. Whatever this was, whatever her father had been trying to stop, she was in it now. And she couldn't stop. Not until it was over. The weight of the decision pressed down on her. She had no choice but to keep moving forward. She couldn't turn back. Not now. Keanu stood, his posture rigid. Let's get to work then. Gregor's eyes glinted with something that almost resembled approval. Good. It's time to take the fight to them. But be ready for what's coming. It won't be easy. They won't go down without a fight. Lily turned toward the door, her mind racing. This is it. There was no turning back. Her father's legacy, the truth, the danger. It was all intertwined now. And she was the key to everything. She didn't know what would happen next. But she knew one thing for sure. They were in this together, and together, they would face whatever came their way. The journey was never easy, not for Lily, not for Keanu, and certainly not for Sarah. The tension that had settled over them like a thick fog hadn't lifted as they made their way deeper into the city. With each passing moment, the weight of the situation seemed to grow heavier, the world around them closing in. Every corner they turned felt like a potential trap, every face in the crowd a potential enemy. Lily couldn't stop thinking about the file. The names, the places, the details. It was all too much. Her father had been involved in a world she hadn't even known existed. She had thought she was simply dealing with the aftermath of a man who had made some bad choices, but now she understood that it was far more complicated than that. He hadn't just been trying to protect her. He had been trying to take down an empire. They arrived at the first location on the map, a small, unassuming cafe on the corner of an old street, the kind of place that seemed to belong to another time. The neon sign flickered weakly above the door, casting a dull light on the cracked pavement. There was no one waiting outside, no obvious signs that this was a meeting spot for anyone, let alone people who could help them. Keanu's eyes scanned the area as they approached, his hand resting near the holster on his belt. Sarah, always alert, moved ahead of them, pushing open the door without a second thought. Lily followed closely, her stomach tight with anxiety. As soon as they stepped inside, the air felt different, thicker, charged with the hum of something unspoken. The cafe was mostly empty, save for an older man sitting at a corner booth, sipping on a cup of coffee. He didn't look up as they entered, but Lily could feel his gaze on them, even without his eyes meeting hers. It was as if he knew they were coming, like he had been expecting them all along. Lily, Keanu said quietly, his voice steady. This is it. Lily nodded, but the knot in her stomach tightened. She had no idea what to expect, no idea who this man was or what he could offer them. She felt like a child, stumbling into a world that wasn't hers, trying to make sense of something that seemed far beyond her reach. The man at the booth finally looked up, his eyes sharp and calculating. He was older, with graying hair and a weathered face, but there was something about him, something in the way he held himself, that spoke of experience, of a life lived on the edge. You must be Lily, he said, his voice gravelly but not unkind. I've been waiting for you. Lily felt her heart skip a beat. How do you know my name? The man smirked, his lips curling just slightly. Let's just say I know more than you think. He motioned for them to sit. Sit down. We have a lot to discuss. They didn't hesitate. Keanu slid into the seat next to Lily, his eyes never leaving the man. Sarah took the seat across from him, her arms crossed, watching him intently. My name is Victor, the man said, and I'm someone who can help you, if you're willing to listen. Lily exchanged a glance with Keanu before speaking. Help us how? Victor leaned back in his seat, studying them with a calm intensity. You have something very valuable, Lily. Something that could change everything. Lily's heart raced. The papers. It all came down to this, didn't it? The information her father had left behind, the secrets he had hidden, the danger that now threatened their every move. She hadn't realized just how much was at stake until now. Those papers, they're not just pieces of paper, Victor continued. They're the key to unraveling a massive web of corruption. Your father, he wasn't just trying to protect you. He was trying to burn down a system that has controlled everything for years. But he couldn't do it alone. And now, you're in the position to finish what he started. Keanu leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. And what do you want from us? Why should we trust you? Victor's gaze flicked to Keanu, then back to Lily. Because I've been where you are. I've seen the destruction this network can cause. I've lost everything because of it. People like you, people who have the courage to fight back, are rare. But you can't do this alone. And you can't afford to make any mistakes. Lily felt her breath catch in her throat. He's been where we are? It was hard to wrap her mind around. What could this man have possibly experienced that made him so familiar with the danger they were facing? Keanu wasn't satisfied, though. And how do we know you're not just another player in this game? How do we know we're not walking into a trap? Victor smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You don't. But if you want my help, you'll have to trust me. And trust isn't something you can buy or sell. It's earned. So, earn it, and I'll help you. I've got connections, resources, people who can move things behind the scenes. People who have been waiting for this moment. Lily glanced at Keanu. She could see the uncertainty in his eyes, but she could also see the flicker of hope. They didn't have any other options. This man, as dangerous as he might be, could be the only chance they had to take this fight to the heart of the enemy. I'll do whatever it takes, Lily said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind in her mind. What do we need to do? Victor nodded, his expression serious. First, you need to understand exactly what you're up against. The network you're dealing with is far-reaching. It's not just a group of bad guys. This is a system that controls entire industries, governments, and even law enforcement. They've been operating in the shadows for decades, and now they're coming for you because they know you've got what they need. Lily swallowed hard, the reality of the situation settling over her like a cold, suffocating blanket. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about dismantling something so powerful, so entrenched in the world, that it seemed impossible. Victor continued, his voice unwavering. We need to make sure they never see you coming. We need to move quickly and strategically. And most importantly, you need to prepare for the worst, because they won't hesitate to destroy anyone who stands in their way. Lily's heart pounded. It felt like they were standing on the edge of a precipice, with nothing below them but darkness. But there was no turning back now. Keanu turned to Lily, his voice low. Are you sure about this? We don't know him. We don't know who we're dealing with. Lily took a deep breath, then nodded. We don't have a choice. If we don't trust him, we're dead already. Victor stood up, his eyes locking onto hers. Good. I knew you were smart. Now, let's get to work. Lily didn't know what was coming next, but she knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was, they were all in this together. And together, they would fight. The morning after their meeting with Victor, the tension had become almost unbearable. Lily sat in a cramped, dimly lit room at the back of a rundown hotel, the faint hum of the city filtering through the thin walls. The hours had blurred together as she tried to process everything Victor had said. It was a lot to take in, too much, maybe, but one thing had become clear. There was no turning back. They were in this now, and the stakes had never been higher. Keanu and Sarah were already up, moving through their gear and discussing next steps. Sarah, ever the strategist, was laying out the map again, tracing her finger along the various marked locations. Lily couldn't focus on the paper in front of her. Her mind kept drifting back to Victor's words. The network they were up against, it wasn't just a group of criminals. It was a system, a sprawling web that had its fingers in everything. Governments, corporations, even the media. They all played a part in maintaining the control they had over the world. Keanu, check the perimeter again, Sarah said, her voice calm but authoritative. We can't afford to be caught off guard. On it, Keanu replied without hesitation. His eyes flickered to Lily for a moment, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. They all understood the danger. Lily, lost in thought, rubbed her temples, trying to push back the growing sense of dread. How could they take on something so vast? Where did they even begin? Victor had told them to prepare for the worst, but no amount of preparation could make her ready for what was coming. The more she thought about it, the more she realized just how much she had been kept in the dark about her father's life. She had spent so many years resenting him for his distance, for his secrets, and now it seemed like all of it had been part of a plan. a plan that was far bigger than her. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. Keanu glanced over at her, a silent question in his eyes. She gave him a small, strained smile. "We need to get this over with," she said, her voice firm, but there was an edge to it that betrayed her nerves. "No more waiting." Keanu nodded and turned back to his task. "We'll move out in 15 minutes. You ready?" Lily hesitated for a moment, then nodded, more to herself than anyone else. There was no more room for second-guessing. Sarah folded the map and slipped it into her bag. "The first stop is one of the safe houses, one of Victor's contacts. It's a small lead, but it's something." Lily's stomach churned. A small lead. That's all they had, tiny pieces of a puzzle that might never fit together. Still, they had no other choice. 15 minutes later, they were on the move, blending into the hustle of the city streets. The low hum of traffic and distant chatter filled the air, but Lily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every shadow felt like a threat, every passing car an enemy tailing them. She tried to push the anxiety aside, but it clung to her like a shadow. The location was in an industrial part of the city, where the buildings were old and worn down, their windows covered with grime and their exteriors coated in layers of rust and neglect. They stopped in front of a nondescript door in an alley. The only sign that this was anything but an abandoned building was the faint outline of a symbol on the door, a crescent moon and a star. Lily didn't understand its significance, but Victor had told them it would identify the place as a safe house for allies. Sarah knocked twice, then paused. Lily held her breath, her pulse quickening. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a woman with short, dark hair and a no-nonsense expression. She looked them over quickly, then stepped aside to let them in without a word. The room beyond was small, dimly lit, and smelled faintly of coffee. It was nothing like the safe houses Lily had imagined. There were no luxury amenities, no feeling of comfort, just bare walls, a few chairs, and an old wooden table in the center. "We're here to help," the woman said, her voice quiet but firm. "Victor sent you?" Lily nodded. "Yes." The woman's eyes studied them for a moment, then she stepped toward the table, motioning for them to sit. "We don't have much time. The network is closing in, and we need to move quickly." Lily's stomach tightened. She had expected danger, but not this feeling of impending doom, as if everything they did was a step closer to a trap. She couldn't shake the sensation that they were being played. "How do we start?" Keanu asked, his tone calm but guarded. The woman sat down across from them, folding her arms. "First, we need to verify what you have. Those papers, show them to me." Lily hesitated, but only for a moment. She reached into her bag and pulled out the file Gregor had given her, the thick stack of papers that had been her father's final gift. She placed it on the table, pushing it toward the woman. The woman took the papers without a word, flipping through them quickly. As she read, her expression remained unreadable. Finally, she looked up, locking eyes with Lily. "This isn't just a list of names and locations," the woman said slowly. "This is something much bigger. Your father was more involved than we thought." Lily felt a chill race down her spine. "What does that mean?" The woman's lips curled into a grim smile. "It means that your father wasn't just trying to bring down a few corrupt individuals. He was trying to take down the whole system. And now, they know you have the information. They'll stop at nothing to get it back." Keanu's jaw tightened, and Sarah's eyes flickered with a warning. "We've been running, hiding. How long do we have before they come for us?" The woman leaned in, her voice lowering. "Not long. They're already on their way." A sudden, loud knock at the door made everyone freeze. Lily's breath caught in her throat. The woman stood up quickly, moving toward the window. She gestured for the group to stay low and quiet. "Get ready," she whispered. "This is it." Lily's heart raced in her chest, and for the first time, she felt the weight of what they were up against. Everything her father had been trying to stop, everything they were now fighting for, was crashing down on them all at once. The door swung open with a violent force, and two men stepped inside, their faces cold and unfeeling. They weren't here for a conversation. They were here for something much more dangerous. The game had begun. The narrow passageway beneath the safe house was a stark contrast to the chaos above. The walls were damp, and the air was musty, carrying a strange mix of mildew and stale air. Lily's feet echoed off the concrete as they hurried down the tunnel, their movements quick but deliberate. They didn't know how much time they had before the reinforcements arrived, but every minute they spent in the tunnel was one less minute they could use to get away. The woman who had helped them, whom Lily still didn't know much about, led the way with a steady pace, her expression unreadable. Sarah, Keanu, and Lily followed close behind, their senses alert. Keanu kept glancing over his shoulder, his eyes scanning for any signs of movement. The silence in the tunnel was deafening, broken only by their footsteps and the occasional distant drip of water from the walls. Lily's mind was still reeling. The man they had just confronted, the one with the scar, had said they were marked now. She couldn't stop thinking about those words. Marked. Her father had been involved in something far bigger than anyone had imagined, and now it was her turn to face the consequences. They came to a fork in the tunnel, and the woman halted, holding up a hand to signal them to stop. Her eyes flicked back to Sarah and Keanu before settling on Lily. "We'll be safe for now, but not for long," the woman said, her voice low and urgent. "We need to get to a secure location before the network closes in." Lily nodded, though she didn't feel reassured. Secure location? How secure could anything really be when they were up against an organization that seemed to have eyes everywhere? "Who are you?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, how do we know we can trust you?" The woman's eyes darkened, but she didn't hesitate. "Victor trusted me, and that's all you need to know for now. My name is Elena." Elena. The name was familiar, but Lily couldn't place it. The world her father had been involved in was full of layers, secrets upon secrets, and it seemed that Elena was yet another one of those secrets. Sarah, who had been unusually quiet until now, stepped forward. "How long do we have before they find us?" Elena's eyes flickered to the map in Sarah's hands, then back to the tunnel ahead. "We don't have long. The people who are after you, they're relentless. They won't stop until they get what they want." Lily's throat tightened. She hadn't realized how much danger they were really in until now. She had spent so long focusing on the task at hand, thinking about the papers and the mystery her father had left behind. But the reality was that they were dealing with something far more dangerous. They weren't just fighting for answers, they were fighting for their lives. Keanu's voice cut through the tension. "We need to keep moving." Elena nodded and began walking again, her pace quickening. As they walked, Lily's thoughts continued to churn. What now? She had seen how quickly things could escalate. One minute, they were talking to an ally, and the next, they were fighting for their lives. The stakes had shifted in an instant, and now she understood. This wasn't just about stopping a few bad people. It was about taking down an entire system. The people after them weren't just criminals. They were part of a machine that controlled everything. Her thoughts were interrupted when Elena stopped abruptly. The woman motioned for them to stay low and quiet, her hand held up in a silent command. She was listening, her head tilted slightly as she strained to hear something. The others followed her lead, dropping to the ground, their bodies tense. Lily's heart raced as she tried to steady her breathing. The sound of distant footsteps echoed through the tunnel, too close for comfort. Whoever it was, they weren't alone. Elena's eyes flashed with determination. "We need to move faster. There's no time to wait." Keanu nodded and stood, his eyes scanning the darkness ahead. "We'll go quiet. No sound." Sarah tightened her grip on her bag and nodded as well, her face pale but resolute. Lily's mind raced as they continued down the tunnel, moving with as much stealth as they could muster. But the footsteps were getting louder. A shadow flickered in the distance. Then, the unmistakable sound of gunfire rang through the air. Lily flinched, instinctively ducking, but Elena's voice was sharp and commanding. "Move. Now." They ran. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of them, the darkness closing in as the sound of pursuit grew louder. Every breath Lily took felt like it might be her last. Every footstep she made echoed like a countdown. There was no time to think, no time to process. All she could do was run. Ahead, Elena's figure was a blur, leading them deeper into the maze of tunnels. Keanu stayed at the rear, keeping an eye on the shadows behind them, ready to defend. Sarah was beside Lily, her face tight with concentration. Lily could barely keep up, her legs burning as she pushed herself harder, her chest tightening with each breath. The gunfire behind them was getting closer now, and Lily could hear the shout of a voice, one that was unmistakably familiar. "Stop! You can't run forever." It was the man with the scar, the one they had left behind. "He's alive," Lily thought, panic bubbling in her chest. "They're going to catch us." They rounded a corner in the tunnel, and for a moment, Lily thought they might have lost them. But then a blast of heat and force erupted from behind, slamming into her with a wave of pressure. She was thrown off her feet, landing hard on the cold concrete floor with a grunt. For a moment, everything went silent, dazed. Lily tried to push herself up, but her vision blurred, and her head spun. She reached out, her hands scraping against the ground as she struggled to regain her bearings. But when she looked up, she saw the others, Keanu, Sarah, and Elena, rushing toward her. "We have to keep going," Keanu shouted. His voice was laced with urgency. Lily nodded, pushing herself to her feet, but as she did, she felt the ground tremble beneath her. No, this wasn't just a tunnel anymore. It was a trap. The network was closing in, and they had no way out. The ground beneath them shook again, stronger this time, and the echo of footsteps grew louder. Lily's heart raced as she tried to shake off the dizziness. She could still feel the lingering pressure from the blast, but the moment she pushed herself back onto her feet, she knew there was no time to waste. The network was closing in, and they were trapped. Keanu's eyes were sharp, scanning the tunnel around them, but it was clear they were in a dire situation. The blast had disoriented them, and now, the sound of more footsteps echoed ominously from the narrow corridor behind them. They were running out of options. "Fast! Elena!" Lily called out, her voice trembling slightly. "What's the plan? We can't outrun them forever." Elena didn't answer immediately. Her face was etched with tension as she led them down yet another twisting turn in the tunnel. Her eyes flicked over her shoulder, as if calculating their next move. The silence was maddening. The walls of the tunnel seemed to close in on them, growing more suffocating with each passing second. "We keep moving," Elena finally said, her voice steady despite the urgency. "There's a safe house further ahead. If we can make it, we can regroup." Lily nodded, even though doubt gnawed at her insides. A safe house? How many of those were left? How many of those had already been compromised? She didn't say anything, though. There was no time for second-guessing. They ran. And then, suddenly, the tunnel took a sharp turn to the right, opening up into a small chamber. It was quiet here, eerily quiet. Lily barely had time to react when Elena spun toward them, her hand raised in a warning gesture. "Get down," Elena hissed, her eyes scanning the walls of the chamber. "This is a trap." Before anyone could ask what she meant, the walls of the chamber seemed to shift. A low hum filled the air, and Lily felt her heart skip a beat. The room was closing in on them. The walls were narrowing, slowly but steadily, with no escape in sight. "It's a pressure trap," Sarah whispered, her face pale. "They want to crush us in here." Lily's stomach dropped. How could we have been so blind? How had they not seen it? The walls were closing in, and they were trapped in a metal box that was becoming smaller and smaller. Elena didn't waste a second. "This way!" she shouted, running toward a door at the far end of the room. It was barely noticeable against the walls, but it was there. Keanu was the first to react. He darted forward, kicking the door open with a forceful shove. It creaked as it gave way, revealing another passage. Without hesitation, the group rushed through, just as the walls of the chamber groaned under the pressure of the trap. But as they moved through the new passageway, it became clear. This was only the beginning. The moment they stepped into the new tunnel, they felt the atmosphere shift. The air was thick with tension. They were running out of options, and they were running out of time. "Elena!" Keanu barked. "Which way now? We need to move faster." Elena's face was set in determination. "There's a way out up ahead, but we need to get to the extraction point before the reinforcements arrive." Lily wasn't sure what to believe anymore. She had seen how quickly everything could unravel. One moment, they were making progress, and the next, they were seconds away from being captured, or worse. But Elena's calm demeanor, the way she held herself in the midst of all this chaos, gave Lily a tiny shred of hope. Keanu's footsteps were rapid as they moved, and Lily followed close behind, trying to ignore the pounding in her chest. She glanced back for a moment, half expecting to see the two men they'd left behind chasing after them, but the hallway was empty. The silence felt too unnatural. Where are they? Suddenly, Keanu stopped dead in his tracks, holding up his hand to signal the others. Wait. Lily's heart skipped a beat. She froze, instinctively holding her breath, listening. At first, there was nothing but the sound of their own breathing. But then it came, a soft, distant hum that grew louder with every passing second. Lily's gut twisted. It was the unmistakable sound of engines. They're coming, Elena said, her voice low. We're out of time. Lily's mind spun. This was it. They were cornered. The tunnel ahead of them was dark, but they couldn't wait for it to lead to safety. It might just lead them right into the hands of their enemies. The thought of being captured, of the network using her father's legacy against her, made her sick to her stomach. Then, a sound, sharp, like the hiss of air, came from ahead. Lily squinted into the darkness, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. And then, she saw it. A vehicle, one of the many black SUVs they had been seeing all over the city. The extraction point was too close, and they'd almost missed it. We have to go now, Keanu shouted, grabbing Lily's arm and pulling her toward the exit. We don't have time to waste. With no time to think, they sprinted towards the vehicle, and the door opened just in time for them to dive inside. The engine roared to life as soon as they were all inside. The moment the doors slammed shut, the vehicle shot forward, pulling them away from the danger, away from the pursuit. Lily collapsed back into her seat, her breath ragged. It wasn't over, but for the first time since they'd started this journey, she felt a small flicker of hope. They had escaped, this time. As the city faded behind them, the darkness of the road stretched ahead, and Lily knew that they had only just begun to uncover the full scope of the network they were up against. There was no turning back now. Her father's legacy was hers to unravel, and they would stop at nothing to finish what he had started. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?